Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. We're going to look at Psalm 132, and then I've got some other passages to share with you to help illuminate what this means. We're going to look at also 2 Samuel 6, 6 through 8, 1 Samuel 6, 21 into 7, chapter 7, verse 2. Briefly at Hebrews 1:13 because it quotes this text, 2 Chronicles 6:41 and 2 Samuel 7:14. Here's the text of Psalm 132. Lord, remember David and all the hardships he endured, and how he swore an oath to the Lord, making a vow to the mighty one of Jacob. I like how the CSB chose to capitalize that. It's a big deal. We don't do a lot of um, I was Johnny come lately when the work was done, when the Lifeway finished the translation work to make the CSB. Um, Capitalized divine pronouns are not in the original manuscripts, not in the ancient manuscripts, and so in our effort to be as true as possible to the oldest and most reliable sets of manuscripts, we chose not to capitalize he, his, him, himself when referring to God in the CSB. We kept doing it in our curricula because people got attached to it. But man, we got some hate mail because they're like, you're supposed to capitalize he when talking about God. I'm like, the ancient manuscripts don't. So it's rare. It's rare. When you think about it, capitalizing the divine pronouns is sort of interposing your own interpretation into the text. You are kind of making an assumption, although sometimes it's just patently obvious that it's talking about God. But you run the risk of capitalizing a he, him, his, your, assuming it's about or it's addressing God when it's not. And so that risk alone was enough to strike some fear in our hearts. And so it's rare that you would see this kind of capitalization. And that's precisely because of the team's commitment to the fidelity to the ancient manuscripts. I will not enter my house or get into my bed. I will not allow my eyes to sleep or my eyelids to slumber until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling for the mighty one of Jacob. So here's some insight into what's happening here. You need context. This is not like a psalm of David in the superscript, but it's about David. Lord, remember David and all the hardships he endured. What could be referred to here is 2 Samuel 6, 6 through 8, when they're transporting the Ark of the Covenant, and a guy named Uzzah reaches out to stop the Ark from falling off its mounts. And then he struck dead. 2 Samuel 6, verse 7. On the spot, the text says. God struck him dead on the spot for his irreverence, and he died there next to the Ark of God. The full verse is, then the Lord's anger burned against Uzzah, and God struck him dead on the spot for his irreverence, and he died there next to the Ark of God. David was angry because of the Lord's outburst against Uzzah, so he named that place Outburst Against Uzzah, as it is today. That one's not hard to capitalize because it's a proper noun, because it's the name that is given to this place. So back to the point here, the instructions were given explicitly. Don't touch the Ark of God. Even the Levitical priests who would carry it would use these poles that were put through these hoops on the corners of it so that they didn't have to touch it. And when the Israelites crossed the Jordan, they did so from how many yards away? It was like 1,000 yards away. I can't remember the exact distance, but it was like you'd have to squint to see the Ark. Like that's how wide the berth was that they gave the Ark of the Covenant. So this wouldn't happen. And like this story is fascinating because Uzzah's intentions seem to be good. He's trying to help. Think about that though. He's trying to help God. Uzzah may have robbed us of a miracle. The Ark of the Covenant is slipping from its mounts. The oxen that were pulling it stumbled, and Uzzah's reaching out a hand to try to help. But in doing so, he violated God's command. We know exactly why God struck Uzzah dead on the spot? Because the text says why. God struck him dead on the spot for his irreverence. And so this may be conjecture, but I think that Uzzah robbed us of a miracle by doing that. But David felt the way that a lot of people who hear that text for the first time feel. He's angry because of the Lord's outburst against Uzzah. He would have wanted God to just show Uzzah some grace, but God meant what he said. God says what he means, and he means what he says. And he said, don't touch the ark or you'll die. Uzzah touched the ark. Uzzah died. That's 100% consistent behavior on God's part. So who are we, David, to be angry at God? This is a tough time. The ark had been taken by the Philistines in a place called Jair, and also is it Kiriath Jearim. They took it for years, I think. Let me confirm. 1 Samuel 6:21 into the first two verses of the next chapter. The Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and get it. So this is before the temple existed. Solomon is the one who would build the temple. David was king before his son Solomon. That's also when you'd see the schism and the separate nations of Israel and Judah. But what do you do with the Ark of the Covenant in the meantime? Go back and see our series in Joshua. Jerusalem was not the original location for worship. It was kept in a separate town, and then Jerusalem Jerusalem had to be conquered. There were other people there, and so it had to be retaken, and then the temple built, and then the Ark of the Covenant dwelt in the Holy of Holies, in the center of the center of the center of the temple. But before the temple existed, what do you do with it? The Ark was then kind of vulnerable, and let's see. Oh, I thought I included a reference to the Philistines taking it. I'm sorry. So look, so the people of Kiriath Jearim came for the ark of the Lord and took it to Abinadab's house on the hill. They consecrated his son Eleazar to take care of it. Time went by until 20 years had passed since the ark had been taken to Kiriath Jearim. Then the whole house of the Lord, the whole house of Israel longed for the Lord. Yeah, okay, there it is. So the Ark of the Covenant has been out of position for a long time, and things hadn't worked. So it's possible, of the numerous hardships David went through, this is the one that we're talking about, because the reason that one's alluded to as a possible explanation for the hardships of David is that we're looking for a place for the Lord, a dwelling place, a dwelling for the mighty one of Jacob. He wanted a place to keep the ark, and it's deeply frustrating. Now, as a church planter, this can hit home, because I can relate, man. Every single day, I think about this. Every single day. I mean, I guess that's to be expected. It's literally my job. But I think about this stuff every single day. Our church plant has relocated from the AMC Factoria 8 Theater to Carriage Crest Elementary School. And we did that so that we could save more money, so that we could meet the colossal, historic, within the history of church planting. These are some of the highest down payments church plants have ever had to produce to be able to buy property. Legacy churches paid $80,000 for 10-acre lots and giant 12,000 square foot buildings sprawling across a campus. And they were founded in 1948. And they're like, we're debt free. And it's like, well, good. I hope you paid off your $80,000 loan over the last 75 years. Of course you're debt free. And now, meanwhile, church plants today will pay $3 million for a dump. Okay, like a derelict dump. And we also have to then bring it up to King County's draconian codes. We found one building, and the sellers were interested in selling it to us for $2 million. But in order to bring it up to code, the ADA, American with Disabilities Act, didn't exist at the time of this thing's construction. It has no wheelchair access ramp. And so we can't use it unless we get rid of the knob and tube wiring and install a wheelchair ramp and replace the asbestos in the ceiling and redo the roof. And like the total, we hired a firm to give us an estimate, and the figure came to $700K. So the real cost was going to be $2.7 million for a dump. And then we'd have to keep renting the theater in the meantime, doubling our cost. Like we would own a building and rent a theater. Otherwise, we'd have to meet in the dump, which I was willing to do, by the way. But like, it's so hard. Here's how I understand verse 5 of this text as a church planter who's currently looking for a dwelling place for the Redemption Church. The Lord poured out mightily at AMC Theater. The Lord has already poured out mightily at Carriage Crest Elementary School. We are like the tabernacle, and we are waiting on the temple. We heard of the ark in Ephrathah. We found it in the fields of Jair. So Jair is another name for Kiriath Jearim, this place that we see listed right there. Like 20 years it's spent in Kiriath Jearim, according to 1 Samuel 6. So we heard of the ark in Ephrathah. We found it in the fields of Jair. Let's go to his dwelling place. Let's worship at his footstool. Now, it's in Jair. It's been there for 20 years, and they think of it as his dwelling place. Like, why? Well, because that's where the ark is. I've made jokes in years past about like Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I hope we don't find the ark, because it's just scary. But joking aside, dare I say it, the ark today is a gold box, because the presence of God is now within believers. So this is conjecture, but it's possible that a New Testament believer could touch the Ark of the Covenant and not die like Uzzah did, because we actually have that very presence of God, not the Shekinah glory of God, not the Mount Sinai, like your face is going to glow because you see the train of his robe pass by. Like that's actually deadly for us. We have the Holy Spirit living within us. And so they knew they needed the Ark of the Covenant. Remember, this is an Old Testament text. These are Old Testament believers. This is long before Jesus was born. And the way you worshiped was by adherence to the law of Moses, and the observation of the festivals prescribed, the sacrificial system prescribed by God, adherence to the commandments, and everything in the Torah. The Talmud, not binding. Those are the words of men. Jesus would rebuke them for nullifying God's commands for the sake of human traditions. Okay? Did you hear that? My Catholic friends, don't nullify the word of God for the sake of man-made traditions. Jesus rebuked the Pharisees for precisely that reason. Now, these Old Testament believers needed the Ark of the Covenant. And so they go to Jair because they're like, that's where God dwells. Why? Because that's where the Ark is. There's even dispute in this. There's a whole prehistory to where the Samaritans even came from. But in their worship practice, there was a dispute. They believed that you really worshiped at this altar that Abraham had made, where he made this offering to Melchizedek, this priest who's not from the line of Levi, because the Levi wasn't born yet. Aaron wasn't born yet. Like he's a priest in the order of Melchizedek, and he's anointed by God as a priest. And Jesus is conveyed to the great high priest in the book of Hebrews, but he's of the line of David. Okay, he's from the tribe of Judah. He's not from the tribe of Levi. And so the author of Hebrews, whom I suspect to be Apollos, conveyed it this way: he is a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, not the order of Levi, but the order of Melchizedek, where Abraham made that offering to this priest Melchizedek before we fully understood like the sacrificial system. Before it had been even totally revealed, Samaritans were like, this is where you worship. And the Jews are wrong. They're over there worshiping in Jerusalem. this mountain, this is where you're really supposed to worship. So they were caught up in all sorts of legalisms, and they just ripped pages out of the Torah. Frankly, the Samaritans were wrong. But Jesus meets this woman at the well in John chapter 4, and he gives her prophetic teaching that was really coming true in that moment. And it's about the nature of worship and how it's going to change. And he told her, a day is coming and has now come when we'll worship God neither in Jerusalem nor on this mountain, but true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. God is spirit, so his worshipers worship him in spirit and in truth, meaning you're no longer going to have to go to Jerusalem. The temple is about to be obsolete. The presence of God is currently right there in front of her, and the Ark of the Covenant is still set up, and sacrifices are still being carried out during Jesus' day. Strictly speaking, the Old Testament was still in effect while Jesus walked the earth. In fact, Jesus would heal someone and then command them to go carry out the sacrifices that are commanded. So the Ark of the Covenant is there in Jerusalem while Jesus is in Samaria. And he's talking to a Samaritan woman who had a bad reputation. She gives one of the most incredible examples of come and see evangelism ever. In fact, what am I saying? That's where we get the term come and see evangelism from. Sorry, misspoke there. She tells everybody in town, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. It's opposite of virtue signaling. She's like, he knows all about my lascivious past and present. Like, he knows everything about me. And so she's not gossiping about herself. She's like, he knows everything about me. Come meet him. And so that's come and see evangelism. Well, that teaching about the nature of worship speaks to this. We are no longer bound by this kind of thinking. They had to go to Jar. They had to go to Kiriath Jearim. They had to get the Ark of the Covenant. They had to bring it back to Jerusalem. When it finally arrives, they would eventually bring it to Jerusalem when Solomon later put it in the temple. But when it did come home, its temporary home before the temple, that's when David's like dancing and killing a bull every so many steps. Something that's not prescribed in scripture, by the way. It's just extravagant, excessive worship. And it kind of echoes what David himself would later write in Psalm 51. So they need the ark physically present. You and I don't. Rise up, Lord, come to your resting place, you and your powerful ark. May your priests be clothed with righteousness, and may your faithful people shout for joy. They want to see worship happen. They want to come out of the Exodus era, and they want to see the temple. Now, it wouldn't come until years later, but this is what they're praying for. Look at the word ark briefly. The word ark is used to describe Noah's boat and this. And it's this vessel that saves, and everyone who enters it is spared. And so this Ark of the Covenant is this vessel that saves, both in the case of Noah and in the case of this acacia wood chest with cherubim on top, encased in gold. And inside it are the tablets of the Ten Commandments, some of the manna from the Exodus, and Aaron's staff, which had budded. There was a dead stick that came to life again. May your priests be clothed with righteousness. We had this prescription for the things that the priests are supposed to wear. And things aren't ready yet. Like, they're still living in anticipation, kind of like the Redemption Church. They're living in anticipation for their permanent temple. Well, permanent. See our study in Daniel, and then also what we're going to talk about in Revelation that happened in AD 70. For the sake of your servant David, do not reject your anointed one. Now, here's where I believe Psalm 132 begins to become apocalyptically prophetic. The Lord swore an oath to David, a promise he will not abandon. I will set one of your offspring on your throne. If your sons keep my covenant and my decrees that I will teach them, their sons will also sit on your throne forever. This is also, let's see, I pasted it down here. It's also Um, in 2 Samuel, here's like part of the cool promise from God after David's affair with Bathsheba. The child born to them died. Their next son was Solomon. And before Solomon was born, God spoke over David's son in a way that clearly applied both to Jesus and in separate ways to Solomon. In fact, I rarely do the lowercase a, lowercase b thing. The reason that I didn't include the entirety of verse 14 is that I didn't want to chase the rabbit trail about Solomon, who definitely sinned like a lot. So there's this commingling of these prophecies about the perfect son of David who would sit on the throne forever. And then this other son of David who would be chastised by God when he did wrong. And so it's clear that it's not just about Solomon. The son of David, literally in this sense, would be Solomon. And then a descendant of David, therefore, a son, but in a prophetic and eternal sense, with a capital S, even in the CSB, is God. That's Jesus. Jesus is descended from the line of David. Both Joseph and Mary were of the line of David. So they go, at the census, they have to go to the same place. They go to Bethlehem. And so this son of David with a capital S is literally the son of God. He's the one who would sit on a throne. Forget the political implications of this, but I kind of like Benjamin Netanyahu. However, he's not going to be in charge of Israel forever. And get ready for this. Israel's going to become a monarchy again one day. It will. It will. And Orthodox Jews will say as much because they believe these prophecies, but they don't believe that Jesus fulfilled them. This is in part because of the hardening of their hearts. See Romans 11:25. There are still Orthodox Jews who are saved today. I've led Orthodox Jews to Christ. I actually just texted with one a couple of days ago. But they're going to become a monarchy. And that throne from David, now reinstituted in the future Jerusalem, is going to be occupied by Jesus, the perfect Son of God. See this? And by his lineage through Mary, capital S, like Son of God, and also the Son of David, capital S, Son of David, the fulfillment of what was prophesied in 2 Samuel 7:14. So watch for these echoes of the eschatological prophecy here in Psalm 132. Okay, it's pretty cool. The Anointed One. This is one of those that the translation team likely said struggled with, because if you capitalize Anointed One, it's translated literally in Greek into Christ. That's what Christ means, the Anointed One. So I'll bet they struggled with this one. For the sake of your servant David, do not reject your Anointed One. The Lord swore an oath to David, a promise he will not abandon. I will set one of your offspring on your throne. And then in verse 12, you could see the conditional nature of that promise. David violated God's commands at times. Solomon violated God's command at times. Every king but Jesus will have violated God's command at some point, at some time. If your sons keep my covenant and my decrees that I will teach them, their sons will also sit on your throne forever. Right? So that's a conditional promise. God kept his end of the bargain. David did not. Solomon did not. Right? Subsequent kings of Judah and Israel certainly did not. See our study in Ezekiel, especially in the opening chapters. For the Lord has chosen Zion. He has desired it for his home. So they got to bring that ark back. This is my resting place forever. I will make my home here because I have desired it. There's going to be this third temple, and it's like exact specifications are provided in exhaustive detail in the latter chapters of the book of Ezekiel. And we've taught them all verse by verse. The series is titled, And Then You Will Know. it's given with such specificity that it cannot be metaphorical. It's given with such exhaustive detail that it can be only a literal temple from which I believe Jesus will reign. And in my personal conviction, I do believe it's a literal 1,000 years. No, that does not necessarily make someone a dispensationalist. It just means you believe God means what he says. The idea of 1,000 years not being 1,000 years, consider the irony of like not being sure how long 1,000 years is. That was first introduced by Origen, student of Clement of Alexandria. And it was further propagated by Augustine, who could not write against the Roman Empire, to whom he had to submit legally. It didn't go over well for Augustine to talk about the fall of the Roman Empire while he's a citizen of the Roman Empire. Now, God has said, I'm going to do this. He has chosen Zion. He has desired it for his home. This is my resting place forever. Okay? I will abundantly bless its food. I will satisfy its needy with bread. In the closing chapters of Ezekiel, during the millennial reign, we can see these near Edenic conditions that pour out. I believe that it literally prophesies the desalinization of the Dead Sea and the eruption of growth in this river that will flow from it. I think that Zechariah's prophecy about dramatic cataclysmic changes to the topography of Israel are literal. And I think that the whole geography of the region is going to change because of what Zechariah prophesied and because of what Ezekiel prophesied. I will clothe its priests with salvation, and its faithful people will shout for joy. Look at how the voice has changed. As of verse 13, we've been talking about God, or quoting God here, but now God is speaking. And it continues in verses 15 and 16. Here's verse 17. There I will make a horn grow for David. Right? This is a symbol of authority. I have prepared a lamp for my anointed one. This is so cool because I believe this refers to the 7 lampstands in Revelation. Jesus is walking among them, and this gives rise to the letters to the churches at Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea in chapters 2 and 3 of the book of Revelation. They are lampstands. I have prepared a lamp for my anointed one. I think we're getting a glimpse of the New Testament church right here in Old Testament Israel. I will clothe his enemies with shame, but the crown he wears will be glorious. So you could apply that directly and say it's about David, because he's just said there, and meaning in Zion. See verse 13. There could be interpreted Zion. I'll make a horn grow for David. I have prepared a lamp for my anointed one. Right. So in this case, I'm trying to imagine what I'm behind the scenes. Like I said, I showed up after all the work had really been done, and we were just kind of doing the final run-throughs and then learning how we were going to tell the world that it existed, or RCS, this Bible translation. And I can imagine some perhaps relief, actually, that we had said we wouldn't assume the authority to capitalize divine pronouns, precisely because of verses like this one. If you capitalize anointed one, then you're making it about Jesus. If you leave it uncapitalized, you can see how David is anointed. He was literally anointed by Samuel to be king. And so he's literally been anointed, and it allows for the duality of the interpretation, in that it's not just about David, it's also about Jesus. Just like the prophecies about Solomon weren't just about Solomon, they were also about Jesus. I will clothe his enemies with shame. It's something that God did for David and that he will do for Jesus, but the crown he wears will be glorious. I don't know much about a crown that David wore, but I do see Jesus presented gloriously in the text. Wow. Psalm 132 is astounding. Hopefully we're on the right track associating it with the transportation of the ark because it's really about the ark and bringing the ark to its temporary home under David's reign. But I see eschatological prophecy in this text, stuff that the original recipients of Psalm 132 could not have yet grasped. They didn't have they didn't have First and Second Thessalonians. They didn't have the book of Revelation. They didn't have 1 Corinthians 15. Those wouldn't be written for centuries upon centuries later. But as New Testament believers, we can go back and read this and we can see parallels, not just between Ezekiel and Daniel and these Psalms, but also like New Testament prophecy as well. When you sing these Psalms and when you deal with these texts, they're not just like catchy tunes, okay? They'll provide a suggested melody every now and then. You're singing a book of songs that God gave to his people to sing to him. And the original recipients, I believe, were singing prophecy about the coming millennial reign. Even if you don't agree with my take on a literal millennium, you got to agree that the Psalms are prophetic. Otherwise, go ahead and rip the book of Hebrews out of your Bible because you don't really believe it. The Psalms are prophetic. Go ahead and rip out the chapter in John as well about the crucifixion of Jesus. Like, it's quoted. It quotes Psalm 34 by the cross at the passion narrative in John's gospel. The Psalms are prophetic. So we all agree on that, whether you're post-millennialist or amillennialist, or whatever ennialist you are. People were singing about Jesus centuries before his birth, and they didn't know it. These are powerful, powerful texts. Really amazing.